Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Christensen,
I'm Coffee Brown.
and welcome to episode 41 of Don't Die Dumb. We're going to do a little cleanup to start the show this week. We're going to answer a few questions that we got last week that we didn't have time to. And the first one is from Doris, who says, how do you deal with negative people, or should you just cut them out of your life completely? And can that be detrimental to your mental health and physical health?
Yes, in fact, there's actually a term for it. They're called psychic vampires. And these are the people who come over to your house and tell you, oh, my plumbing broke and I've got gout in my big toe and, oh, I found another gray hair. But they never ask about your life and they never want to hear about anything they can improve.
Good example. I'm at someone's house for Thanksgiving. The wife has slaved back then 6 hours. This beautiful buffet. The husband takes one bite and goes, don't you think the turkey's a little dry this year? You want to tell them, just shut up and eat. But that's that negative thing. They got to pull things down. I also think many negative people, if you'll study their lives, they're not doing anything. When you do something, they want to drag you down to that level.
That's right. For some reason, misery loves company. And if you're in a good mood, the people around you will often try to pull you down. But if you're in a bad mood, they often will just either run away or join you down there. They won't try to pull you up. So if people are negative because of something specific, look for some way to support them or just listen. Just listen. Most people just want to be heard. But if you start to realize that they're using you as a venting board and they're not interested in fixing anything or improving anything or appreciating anything, I would say, yeah, that's somebody I would get away from. I know more about how to avoid being a negative person than about how to help someone else not be a negative person, because it becomes part of their identity. They often feel like they would be naive or something if they were less negative. That is actually an error in the sense that we know that you're less likely to suffer cognitive decline and more likely to have a longer health span if you are a less negative person.
Now, my question is, we'll get to this. I have a family, very loving family. I grew up in a very warm, loving household. Love all my brothers and sisters. But I have an older brother that was just cruel to me. He would always have something to say that was mean. And if I was with a woman, he would say something worse. I was on a first date at a family outing, and he came up to me and said some of the meanest stuff, and I cut him out completely.
And she was the prettiest cow at the fair. I mean, it was cruel.
She was going to go off for rodeo, but she couldn't find anybody to ride her. Anyhow, the point being that I cut him out of my life. When do you decide to cut someone out completely? When is it proper?
I think if you realize that they don't want to be happier than they are, then stop trying to help them get there. Mm-hmm. And if you realize that they care about their feelings but not about yours, I'd drop them like a hot potato.
Now you realize that sometimes people aren't trying to do that. What they're trying to relate in a weird way. You say, oh, I woke up, my back is killing me. Your back? Oh, brother,
I got my back.
Yeah. And they're not trying to be negative. That's how they relate. And distinguishing between the two, that's hard for me sometimes,
So I distinctly remember when I was about 19 or 20. At that stage in my life, if you told me you heard that somebody caught a big fish, I would tell you that I had heard about an even bigger fish, or that I saw an even bigger fish or something, It was just what we all did at that time, One time I met a one-armed guy and he told me he caught a fish this big and I didn't know what to do with that. But at some point, somebody told me about catching a big fish and I said, really? What kind of bait did you use? And they started teaching me all about fishing. And I realized that if I stopped playing this one-up game and just ask people, what about that? Everybody started teaching me all kinds of stuff. And suddenly everybody in the world became more interesting to me. When the conversation was about them and about what they know that I don't and experience that I haven't and so on, everybody became my teacher and everybody became interesting. When the conversation was about me, frankly, I've heard all my old stories before.
Two phrases I think are very helpful when people tell you about themselves. Any kind of accomplishment, no matter how little, may be big for them. If you say one of these two things, well, good for you, there you go. The other one is, all right, I'm glad you got that done. Those two things will, the next time that, and I've seen this, the next time they tell you about their accomplishment, it's not about getting the lid off the pickle jar. This time, I raked the whole backyard today, or.
I agree. If your friend tells you they did 5 push-ups, don't respond, really? I do 100 every morning.
Yeah, that's.
Respond with, that's great. When did you start?
Yeah.
And encourage them. There's one point I really, really want to make, which is that we really underestimate the value of appreciations. And this, what I'm saying right now, is very much science-backed. Tons of different studies that are looking at tons of different things are reaching this same conclusion. Appreciate the good things in your life. And you're thinking, I don't have any good things in my life. I'm poor, and my car barely runs, and my boss is a dick. And what good things are those? Almost the poorest of us in this country right now live better than the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, live better than Caesar, live better than King George. We started this country to get away from King George, but our girlfriends don't have syphilis, and we have way better food than he did. We don't have gout, and if we did, we have medicines for it. We are almost the poorest of us have a computer in our pocket. We all have smartphones, and we all are surrounded by music and bright colors and very inexpensive clothing. It's hard to remember now that it used to be that people got clothing like once a year, and they wore it for work, sleep, play, whatever they did. It was all one thing. We are better off now than rich people were just a century ago. But we're comparing ourselves to Elon Musk. Why don't I have $1 trillion and a chance to destroy the country? Or we're comparing ourselves to what's called the Gini index. The gap between the rich and the poor in our country is bigger than it was when we left England. But if you actually look at the absolute standards of your living, there are books, recipe books from Victorian times, the great times when everything was about white Christian males. Mm-hmm. There are books from those times about how to disguise the flavor of rotten fish head soup, and how to boil rotten cabbage and things like that. So count your goddamn blessings. You know what I mean? Like, once in a while, remember how much better off you are.
I can remember my grandma telling my ma, I know the tomato sauce in the spaghetti is sour. Just add sugar. They'll never know.
And you know why there's so many anti-vaxxers now? Because they didn't die as children because they were vaccinated.
Yeah. Now, understand this. It's good to have a positive attitude, but I think you need to have a realistic Pollyanna attitude. That is to say, yeah, I got up today and the sun was shining and I had a nice breakfast. I'm real going to have a good day. But it's got to be tempered with the realism to where you're not expecting everything to be perfect and then upset by yourself because it's not.
Yeah, a good rule of thumb is if you're going to complain about something, or if your friend is going to complain about something, follow that with, what are you going to do about it? Okay? If you're just kvetching, what is the point? Oh my God, it's raining today. I hate that it's raining, But if it's raining today, I think I'll go inside. Now you have a plan.
Now, I believe, because I've seen this, and you can tell me if I'm way off here, that negativity can kill you. And my Uncle Ralph was the nicest guy in the world, but he was married to my sister, who did nothing but complain and embarrass him in public for years. And one day, I said to my sister, my mother, he's going to build up so many carcinogens in him, that poor guy's going to get cancer and die. They both laughed. He had cancer 6 months later, and he died a year later. Before I got cancer, which was supposed to be terminal, they gave me 8 months to live. I went through a terrible divorce, a woman that was just so mean. And I was foolish because I said, why don't we just end this as friends? She saw it as weakness and just pummeled me as mentally as much as she could. And after 6 months of that, I was riddled with cancer. I believe psychologically that can kill you. Am I way off? I'm not a doctor.
The association between chronically negative mental states, pessimism, depression, anxiety, and dementia and shortened lifespans is pretty definite.
Really.
The association with cancer, much less so. But we do know that negative mental states, which cause hormonal changes like chronically increased cortisol levels and so forth, damage your immune system. And this will kind of scare you, maybe kind of encourage you, but the fact is you've had a bunch of cancers already, so have I. Your immune system is constantly finding early cancers and getting rid of them for you, which is really cool. So it makes a lot of intuitive sense that if your immune system isn't working optimally, more of these cancers might sneak through than otherwise. As I say, the actual outcome correlation is not as strong as I'm making it sound, but the biologic plausibility of it is pretty strong.
Okay, as long as we're talking about negative people, we got a negative comment. We get several of them, And this one was, how come you two support traitors to democracy? For example, Mark Kelly. Well, Mark Kelly has said that he may, in fact, consider running for president. Mark Kelly was, I don't know how you can call him a traitor to democracy. He was a decorated soldier, and he didn't have bone spurs. And then he became an astronaut, and he served admirably there. And then when his wife they tried to assassinate her, he stood by her. He didn't cheat on her with several different women or porn stars. I don't know how you can call him a traitor to democracy. I presume because he's been painted that way. But we never talked about Mark Kelly before. So they're using that as an example.
I don't recall his name ever coming up, so
Yeah.
I don't know where you are coming from with that. But be careful that you don't simply assume that everybody who disagrees with you is a traitor. I will say, bluntly, Trump is a traitor because his oath was to the Constitution, but he's trying to undermine free and fair elections, and he's using a bogus conspiracy theory to do that. If you want to load the dice so that the popular vote does not choose the next representatives, then you are a traitor to democracy. And if you're having people sign loyalty oaths to you rather than to the Constitution when they join your administration, you are a traitor to democracy. But if you disagree with somebody else about the level of gun control, and by the way, I'm not at either extreme myself, but I'll tell you what, if my wife got shot by an assassin, it would certainly put me in a bad mood toward guns. And I think that anybody who's not sympathetic to that, and by the way, Gabby made a tremendous recovery.
Yeah.
She was horribly injured, and she's come back and remained a professional public figure, and I deeply admire that. But if that happened to my wife, I would absolutely not be objective about guns. And the other thing that Mark Kelly is controversial for is he said, remember everybody, if you receive an illegal order, it is actually not legal for you to obey it. That is factually true. That is the law. What part of that sounds like traitor to you?
That's where they're getting the traitor remark from, I'm sure,
Well, it's not. It's not treason. Disobeying Trump is not treason. Disobeying the Constitution is treason. Disobeying the law is treason. And subverting the law is treason. So if you want to talk about traitors, I'm happy to have that conversation all day long, but you should pick a better example than someone who says, you should follow the law, and by the way, I hate guns after one of them shot my wife.
A good example of this are the two cavalrymen, soldiers, that refused to attack the Nez Perce village when the cavalry was killing them. And they tried to court-martial them. And the judge said no. There's a military tribunal. They said no. They didn't have to follow those orders. This was the days in the West when people were so prejudiced against Native Americans. But still, they didn't follow illegal orders and kill women and children.
Look at the soldiers who followed Lieutenant Calley during the the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
He actually rounded up a village, a friendly village, but it might have had some Viet Cong in it. He put everybody in a pit and then ordered his men to shoot down into the pit and told them he would kill them if they did not. And they reported him afterward, and he was convicted of war crime. And then later, I believe, pardoned, if I'm not mistaken.
Uh-huh. My point is, don't accept that someone's a traitor. Google it. Find out more about it.
Yeah, I think you need to learn what that word actually means. It doesn't mean disagrees with you. It means actually promotes disobeying the law or subverting the Constitution. And by the way, in the Constitution, it's one of the few things they have an explicit punishment for, death. But it's not death for telling people they shouldn't obey unlawful orders. And it's not death for disagreeing with you about what gun control should look like. It's death for trying to dismantle democracy.
Okay, our next question is going back to foods again. And what they're asking is, could you name 5 foods we should avoid? I mean, I'm not going to tell you things, okay, don't eat a Clark bar every day for lunch. Yeah, those are obvious. But some foods you would think are healthy that actually aren't. I was told for years that white bread is the only bread you should eat.
And it's fortified with vitamins and minerals.
It's a part of this healthy breakfast.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember when white bread was the thing, Wonder Bread and so forth. No, you actually want breads that are coarse, whole grains. Ezekiel bread is made from wheat that has been sprouted. And it's actually very tasty, but it has a lot of plant micronutrients in it that regular bread would not have.
Is this easy to digest?
I'm not aware that it's difficult, I'll put
Okay.
it that way. I probably wouldn't eat Ezekiel bread if I had diverticulitis, though.
And is that expensive?
No, I don't think it's more expensive. A little more expensive maybe than the mass-produced regular breads, which tend to be hyper-processed foods. So look for whole grains, look for multiple grains, look for things that look like you can actually see the bran and grain in them. Those are all probably good markers. Cornmeal is actually pretty reasonable, though it often is made with too much lard. That is in tortillas and stuff. Look for tortillas that have a lower fat content.
So corn versus flour tortillas.
Kind of a wash. What you really want is whole grain, though, and stone ground or something like that, or steel cut would be good. So you want things that have high fiber. The grains are not bad. It's the hyper-processed foods that are bad. They've been so pummeled. So I guess one way that I would suggest that you look for foods you might want to avoid is go online and look at glycemic index. Glycemic index is a measure of how rapidly a particular food will cause your blood glucose to rise. And the higher the glycemic index, broadly speaking, the less healthy the food is going to be for you. There's a couple of caveats here. One is the charts don't all agree with each other, but they'll all be ballpark the same ranking. And the other is that our bodies respond differently. So white bread might spike my sugar more than it would Pete's, for example. And there's no way to account for that in a broadly distributed chart. In fact, you would have to do a lot of individual testing, which you're not going to do to answer that.
What I find, if I get wheat bread at the supermarket, plain, great value wheat bread, there's no holes in it. It's flat. And when I buy, say, Roman meal or some, multigrain bread, there's a lot of air pockets in there. Is that
That has to do with the yeast that they use to rise it. Some kinds of yeast produce more gas and bigger bubbles. But it is also a function of the roughness of the grind, because the superfine flours rise very uniformly. And flours that are chopped up a little bit more coarsely or ground up a little more coarsely don't rise as uniformly, which interestingly reflects, I'm not kidding, the actual structure of the universe at gigantic scale. In the way that we understand the Big Bang to have worked, it ought to be smooth, but it's not. It has a structure more like these coarse spreads, and the reason is the same. There were little denser pockets and more open pockets, and so as the universe expanded, it didn't expand as evenly as we initially predicted it would.
Now, we're talking about health, so we're going to answer this next question. When you see a doctor, call, and when do you seek advice? Because when do you become a pest? Now, before I lose my train of thought, next week I want to talk about Spielberg's movie, not Divergent, but Disclosure.
Oh, Disclosure Day.
And I want to talk about Dulce, New Mexico. Are you familiar with that?
Haven't been there.
Okay, you have a homework assignment. It's really interesting. And we'll talk about those next week. But right now, when are you being a pest to your doctor, and when should you for sure go see them? Other than, you have your arms dangling and you have a serious injury.
So my work was in the emergency room. And we get a lot of people who come in for colds or flus that at one time we thought didn't really need to be in the emergency room. But several things have changed. So I'm going to give you the short answer right now. If you're worried, go see your doctor. Okay?
But then you become a pest and your doctor's blowing you off.
We understand that you haven't been trained to know when to worry and when not to worry. We also understand that every individual worries at different levels. I would never treat a patient as cavalierly as I treat myself. If I did, I'd be a terrible doctor. And we also realize that even for us, triage is difficult. Understanding whether a person is sick or not before you've done an exam and maybe some tests is very, very difficult to do. So our literature, and by this I mean emergency medicine physician literature, has long since said, ACEP, the American College of Emergency Physicians, their official position is, an emergency is defined by the patient, not by the doctor. If you think you have reason to worry, come see us. But do understand the emergency room will be much more expensive and the waits will likely be longer. So if you reasonably think it could be managed in urgent care, go there. Now, early in my career, we expected people to come to us for scary stuff that needed immediate management. But A, they didn't always know what fit in that box, nor do we always up front. Not their fault. And B, more and more, the clinics that manage things by appointment, like family practice and OBGYN and things like that, just told people, well, we can see you in 3 weeks, or you can go to the emergency room today. Well, if you have a sore throat, you'll either be all better or dead in 3 weeks. So they were basically telling everybody to come to the emergency room. So we have become the time-dependent care department rather than the emergency or something bad will happen department. So don't feel bad about going in to see your doctor for things you can schedule, going into urgent care for things that are unlikely to need the big guns, or going to the emergency room if you're not sure and you think you might have something bad. And you know what? About 80% of people don't need to be admitted. We can manage them as outpatients, and that's great. It doesn't automatically mean they didn't need to be there. That would include like a shoulder dislocation or something wouldn't have to be admitted. So not everybody that gets to go home wasted our time. Nobody wastes our time. If you need to be evaluated, that is our job. And if I evaluate you and tell you, you know what, you're not in danger, we're both happy.
No, I'm going to circle back to a subject because we've been talking about negativity, dealing with people that think you're unpatriotic and maybe a traitor, and also how not to be a pest and when to, push your narrative. And I think there are ways of dealing, whether you're conservative or liberal, with the other side. One of them is to say, instead of don't name call, I hate the name calling. One of them is to say, I understand why you feel that way, but you know what I've learned. And then let them have an opinion after that. Now, if it degrades into them saying negative things about you and whoever you're with, it's time to say, well, we both have our own opinion. But there should be ways of trying to bring the temperature down. I know that's a cliche, but trying to actually talk and not yell at each other. Don't you think?
I definitely want to agree with that. But I will say that we have three. Well, I mean, there's a lot more than two positions. There's a lot more than just liberal and conservative. Everybody who doesn't think like you isn't automatically in the opposite camp, for one thing. In fact, liberals tell me all the time I'm not, I don't pass the litmus test enough. So, and yet, other people tell me I'm a liberal or something.
Yeah.
Where I want to go with this, though, is that we think the current dichotomy is between liberals and conservatives. It is not. There is no conservative party. It's between liberals and far-right populists. And the problem is that conservatives think the Republicans are their party because they keep saying over and over, oh, look how conservative we are. Look, we have the Conservative Political Action Committee, and we're conservative. Dropping that word over and over doesn't make you conservative any more than the Clear Skies Act actually reduced pollution, or the Save America Act actually improves voting integrity. So using opposite language is a trick you should have caught on to by now. Real conservatives don't have a party in this country right now, and they need to form one. It's that Lincoln Party, or whatever they decide to name it, needs to happen because we actually need conservatives. What we don't need is neo-Nazis, and that's who we have right now. So I want to say, don't be angry at the other side, don't name call, but these are people who think telling people not to obey illegal orders is treason, but they think subverting the election process is saving America. Work that one through. Really stop and think about that for a second and ask yourself which team you actually want to be on.
I would also say that online, because you're not face-to-face, people do some terribly cruel things. This has resulted in teenage suicides even. Terrible things. And no matter what someone calls you, if you can say back to them, you realize name calling isn't a mature thing to do. Just make a statement and leave it. That sometimes can diffuse the situation, but don't be baited in to calling them names, whether it's libtard, Democrat, or Republicans. Maybe avoid all that. Maybe you can win someone over to your side. I've never considered myself a liberal. I always consider myself a moderate. If you're a Republican, you have a good idea, I'll support you. I don't care.
Actually, the problem with that is, it seems to me that everybody thinks they personally define centrist or moderate. Well, my views are moderate. If you're to the right of me, you're a right-winger, and if you're to the left of me, you're a libtard, but wherever I am is moderate. I would say if you look to the right and the only person standing there is Strom Thurmond or Hitler, you're pretty far to the right. If you look to the left and the only person standing there is Karl Marx, you're pretty far to the left. But we all sort of define ourselves as the centrist, moderate position.
There's still time for this nation to heal itself and find the middle of the road. I am disturbed that hate speech against minorities and religions has become almost trendy.
It's being promoted. It's actually being encouraged.
Yeah.
And this is, now I want to ask you guys a question. And this is something I legit don't have an answer for in my head. I think about this a lot, but I'm not making a lot of progress with it. So help us out here. We want this from you. You help us now, not the other way around. And that is, in Europe, hate speech is not protected free speech. In America, both the right and the left cry when they think their speech is being censored, but they're happy to censor the other side. The left does it under the rubric of political correctness, but it's the same thing. I'm very anti-censorship, but free speech was always meant to be to allow people to have a clash of ideas about politics and society and religion and ideas that matter. It was never meant to protect dropping racial epitaphs or slurs about someone's sexuality, or even just to truncate an entire conversation by saying, you're a traitor because I disagree with you.
We're running out of time, but I also want to say this. Please don't be bedroom police. I'm not gay, but I don't want to know what someone else is doing in their freaking bedroom and control it. We'll get into that more fully at another episode. Thank you so much for viewing. Hope we didn't get too political on you. I hope that maybe we've given you some food for thought. I'm Pete Christensen.
I'm Coffee Brown.
And remember,
don't die dumb.